Hello and welcome to Chapter 32 of the American Pageant for American History or U.S. History or AP U.S. History or College U.S. History or any U.S. History or any history because your only real history is U.S. History. We're doing Chapter 32, the politics of boom and bust from 1920 to 1932. I know you can't wait to get into that. Boom and bust, we have the symbols of Wall Street here. We got the bear and the bull. The bull is for the boom market when things are good, and the bear is for when it's bad. Today we're covering the Republican old guard through frustrated farmers. So let's get into it. So 1920 rolls around, you get election year. Americans are tired of all that crazy progressive reform, all that war, all that death and destruction and wasted money, and so they want to go back to normal. The nomination for the Republicans is Warren G. Harding. He was elected. His campaign promise was a return to normalcy, which I'm not sure is actually a word, but no big deal. He could not detect corruption, and he had a hard time telling people no. So he surrounded himself by this Ohio gang, his card-playing buddies, his poker-playing cronies. They'd sip whiskey and have cigars and do all this stuff. And some of them were kind of some shady fellows. But he did try to assemble the best minds of his cabinet for his cabinet, and it's in quotes. He did nominate, he has a couple successful cabinet members. Charles Evan Hughes as Secretary of State, kind of reshaped American foreign policy, returned to isolationism. You have Andrew W. Mellon, the Secretary of Treasury, who did extensive tax cuts that helped perpetuate the boom of the 20s. It also maybe helped lead to the Great Depression. And then Herbert Hoover, the head of the Food Administration, became Secretary of Commerce, and he's fast-tracked to do some great things, with his work in the cabinet. He did have two really bad officials, actually three if you want to get technical. He had Albert Fall, Secretary of Interior, we'll talk about him here in a little bit, and Harry M. Doherty, Attorney General, and then Charles Forbes, head of the Veterans Bureau. So let's get into it. Harding believed in laissez-faire economics. All that crazy regulation, all that progressivism and reform, get rid of it. Let's let big business do their thing. Let's let the monopolies make money. Let's just have profits and everyone gets rich and goes to parties like Great Gatsby right here. The Supreme Court actually struck down a lot of the progressive legislation, so all that hard work of Roosevelt and Taft and Wilson largely thrown out by the Supreme Court. Many times in our country, often we have this pendulum swing where the pendulum swings one way to the left. We have lots of reform, and then it'll swing back to go back to normal. And then so it kind of goes back and forth with the hope for most people that the progress, that swing is a little longer than going backwards. The Supreme Court ruled in Adkins versus Children's Hospital in 23 that women did not deserve special protection in the workplace. Okay. Sure. Probably decided by 9 white guys. Actually, that's true. Corporations under President Harding could expand without worries of antitrust laws. There's no trust busting going on. The Interstate Commerce Commission was led by men who were sympathetic to the manager of the railroads. And it's kind of like the Gilded Age came back. Monopolies are back in full force. Big business can squeeze their customers for every cent that they want. They do treat their workers well in this decade, though. They figured out that they actually will work a little harder. This is a political cartoon from 1924. It says, government for sale. You can buy the Washington Monument. You can buy the Capitol. You can buy the Army. You can buy the White House. You name it, we'll sell it because these men, you give them a little bit of money and they'll do what you want. After the war, they had to readjust to peacetime. So the government gave up control of some of the businesses that they ran during World War I. The railroads, which were taken over by the government during the war to help the war effort, returned to private control to basically corporations in 1920. You also have the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. War is over. We're never going to do that again, so why not sell our old ships? Yard sale. Whoever wants to buy 1,500 vessels at extremely low prices, America is selling. Labor struggles without a friendly government support, without the support, the progressive government being in power. Labor really struggles. There's a lot of strikes, there's a lot of wage cuts. Things are not going well for workers. To deal with the massive amounts of veterans of the war, 5 million people that served in World War I, Congress created the Veterans Bureau to operate hospitals and provide vocational rehabilitation for the disabled, and they're just to be there to help them out. The American Legion, which is a kind of a social club, but also they were a little more active, and also just a kind of a place to I guess, grieve and work together. And kind of have a brotherhood, a bond. Was founded in 1919 by Colonel Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Yeah, that's his kid. The Legion was convinced Congress in 1924 to pass the Adjusted Compensation Act, which gave every soldier a sum of money depending on their years of service, as a little bit of extra pay. Congress, in terms of foreign affairs, signed joint resolutions to end the hostilities with the Central Powers in 1921. Remember, the United States did not join the League of Nations, did not sign the Treaty of Versailles. Isolationism became prominent in Washington. Let's go back to being hermits. Let's take care of ourselves. Who cares about all these other countries? America lost 53,000 dead in World War I, spent $32 billion. Let's just do our own thing. That was really bad. Secretary of Hughes secured the rights for American oil companies to share oil lands in the Middle East with Britain. So there was not just total isolation. We're still into making money. Obviously, we're Americans. Several world powers met in Washington to disarm. Disarmament conference from 21 to 22 to try to get rid of some of the guns, some of that militarism, the arms race that led to World War I. You have the five-power naval treaty in 1922, which limited the construction of certain types of large naval ships. It applied ratio limits to the number of ships each country could build. I'll show you a chart here in a second to show you that. It also stated the British and the Americans would refrain from fortifying their Far Eastern possessions, including the Philippines, Singapore, which the Japanese were not restricted. And they're saying, oh, America is not fortifying these. Be ashamed to be taking them. Excellent. And then you have the four-power treaty between Britain, Japan, France, and the United States, which was signed to maintain the status quo in the Pacific. Like, hey, we don't need to worry about the Pacific. Everything's cool. Nobody's going to do anything drastic and, like, build an Asian empire or anything or bomb somebody's harbor. Right? Japan, we're looking at you. So here's basically what it is in terms of this five-power navy. So the British are allowed to have 22 battleships. The Americans can have 18, but the tonnage, the weight, had to be, at this ratio. And so the British and the United States could have the same battleship tonnage, the same aircraft carrier tonnage. The Japanese were a little bit less, France, and then Italy. And this is what they do all agreed to. Japan doesn't really adhere to that. They're going to do their own thing. So then they have the nine-power treaty in 1922, which created a more rigid open-door policy in China. So it's not total isolationism. They are trying to work together. And then probably one of the most absurd, asinine, I love the word asinine, it's a fun word, get that in your vocabulary, treaties ever. Calvin Coolidge, his Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, signed with a French minister the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. It banned war. It made war illegal. Why didn't they think of that sooner? Like 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Just make war illegal and nobody will ever die from war, right? I mean, the Miss America pageant, what are they going to do now? I mean, if they can't have world peace, do they need globes for all the kids who can't find Iraq on a map? What's going on? It was ratified by 62 nations. 62 countries said we did it. We've solved world peace. No more war. It's illegal. Meanwhile, Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo are going doing the evil laugh thing. It tried to outlaw war. There was the war. There was one little exception that kind of caused some problems. You could defend yourself, even if you stage a war and like put German troops in Poland and have them dress up as Polish troops and then invade Germany. Then you can, unleash the entire Wehrmacht on the Polish border because it's defensive war. Loopholes, they're always there. Tariffs. So Congress, we're back to isolationism. So Congress passed the Fordney-McCumber Tariff of 1922, raising tariffs from 27 to 35%. Back to protectionism. Let's put up these barriers to help American factories. But that kind of shoots America in the foot, shoots their own foot because they need their loans paid back. Over half of the world's gold is in the United States. These foreign powers, they need to trade. They need to sell stuff so they can make money to pay America back. So Harding and Coolidge were much more prone to increase tariffs than decrease them. Like I said, Europe needed to sell the goods to the United States to get the money to pay back the war debts, but they couldn't, so they do drastic things. Like just print money in Germany, which is going to cause some big problems. Or raise tariffs too. So, hey, you're not going to trade with us. We won't trade with you. which slows global trade, which means if there's a big economic panic like the Great Depression, oh, I guess everyone's going to have a bad economy. Sorry. So back to those bad cabinet members. In 1923, Colonel Charles Forbes became the head of the Veterans Bureau. Uh, I think this is the guy that Harding met on a cruise. He won the presidency and then took a cruise to Hawaii. Met this guy and thought it was really neat and just put him in charge. Like, hey, you're a cool dude. You want a job? Turns out he stole $200 million from the government in connection with building veterans hospitals. Money that was supposed to help the people, the men who served valiantly, the heroes of World War I. He's stealing it. But hey, Harding liked him. I mean, he was fun to play shuffleboard with, and they had, baked Alaska and all that kind of stuff. And then the most infamous is the Teapot Dome scandal. The guy in the picture here is Albert Fall. He convinced the Secretary of Navy to transfer valuable oil-laden land to the Interior Department. Then he turns around and takes that land and leases it to oil companies. Now, the controversy was the Teapot Dome area in Wyoming. He was bribed $100,000 to lease this government land. It's supposed to be protected. It's supposed to be there for the Navy to make sure that the Navy has enough oil to operate their battleships. He leases them to oilman Harry Sinclair. You might have heard of Sinclair, stations, and Edward Doney. Then it was also found out that Attorney General Doherty was accused of illegally selling pardons and liquor permits when liquor was illegal. The Attorney General, that's the lawyer for the U.S. government, selling pardons. Hey, you want a pardon? You want a pardon? You want one? Hey, $10, $10. It's like, oh my gosh, I think there was a reformation at one point for that. Selling indulgences. Martin Luther didn't like that. He nailed 95 Theses to the door. This guy is selling pardons and liquor permits when liquor is illegal. Harding, they were starting to investigate whether or not these guys were connected to Harding. Was Harding connected? Albert Fall goes to jail. He's the first cabinet member in history to go to jail. And so they started investigating, and luckily for Harding, and I mean it, luckily for Harding, he died of pneumonia and thrombosis in San Francisco on August 2nd, 1923. And when he died, they dropped the investigation into him. Here's the White House highway, the oil scandal. They're going to crush everyone. And like I said, luckily for Harding, he died. These are the PBS videos. Check them out on YouTube. So, the new president is Silent Cal. Calvin Coolidge, the guy who made a name for himself as the governor of Massachusetts by firing the Boston police force. He is called Silent Cal. He's just not a man of many words. The day that Harding died, I think he was in a cabin with his dad. His elderly father, I think in Vermont, and the father rushes in and goes, Miss Calvin, wake up. The president's died. You're the new president. Like, most people are like, oh, I'm the most powerful man in the country. He just goes, rolls all over and goes back to sleep. He cleaned up the government. He got rid of the Ohio gang. He allowed the investigations to investigate Fall and Doherty and Forbes. And like I said, Albert Fall went to jail. He was extremely shy. He delivered very boring speeches. He just didn't like to talk. His favorite activity was fishing, because you got to be quiet. There was once a dinner party in which a young couple was sitting there and trying to make conversation. A young lady said, Mr. President, the gentleman and I have a sizable wager that we can get you to say more than 3 words tonight. He looks at him coldly and says, you lose. What a jerk. Apparently when he died, there was a comedian that, Calvin Coolidge died today and nobody noticed. Coolidge did not change the business-friendly policies that Harding created. He basically didn't do anything. I mean, Americans were cool with the president not doing anything because the economy was strong. About the only thing he did say was the business of America was business. He's a little more soul to that. I mean, man, the business of America is business. That sounds better. A little soul, little personality. This guy is dry. Dry like, toast without butter. Here's Calvin Coolidge. The gentleman angler is what it's called here. There was a place in North Dakota he was fishing, and it was good for the economy because the president's there and the Secret Service. And they said, hey, Mr. President, when are you going to go back to Washington? He's like, I'll stay as long as I keep catching fish. They were stocking fish upstream to make sure he stayed a couple weeks longer, just, a couple days longer, maybe a week or two, to make sure the president stayed in that area and made, had a lot more money being spent. So frustrated farmers, our last one for today. The war ended the great demand for foodstuffs and government guaranteed prices. During the war, they were feeding the Allies. They were feeding, all these thousands and millions of people in Europe and all over the world, and the government guaranteed certain prices. And so during the war, there's this boom in farming. People are planting farm products. They're growing tons of agriculture. After the war, demand is plummeting. Supply is still high. And so prices fall. Many bought tractors on credit during the war, and now they have no way to pay them back. The Capper-Volstead Act exempted farmers' marketing cooperatives from antitrust prosecution, trying to help them work together. You then get the McNary-Hagen Bill, which tried to keep prices high by government buying surpluses and selling them abroad. It was a way to help out these farmers. Coolidge vetoed it twice. Nice job, Silent Cow. And so farmers are very frustrated. They endure a decade of just poor economic conditions long before the Great Depression or the Dust Bowl ever hit. And so farmers are really, really frustrated in the 1920s because the demand for their crops fell, and so did prices, and they couldn't pay back their loans. So they lost their tractors and many times lost their farms. Here's a Baylor motor cultivator. Have you placed a sentimental value in your horses out of proportion to the work they are able to perform? Do you like your horses more than a machine? Do you want to get more work done? Buy a tractor. That's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you next time.